Returning from chemo with my daughter and her husband, we passed a Porsche dealership. He said, "That's my dream car." Without hesitation, she handed him my credit card. "Use Mom's card. She has $500K saved and won't live long enough to spend it anyway." 3 days later, they were both in jail, and I was in a Porsche. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets wild, and you're going to want to hear how it ends. The drive home should have been celebratory. Sarah's husband, Marcus, was unusually chatty from the driver's seat, talking about weekend plans and summer vacations like my future was suddenly guaranteed again. I watched the familiar streets of downtown Phoenix scroll past through the passenger window, feeling lighter than I had in almost a year. That's when we passed Henderson's luxury cars, and everything changed. "Stop the car," Marcus said suddenly, his voice thick with want. There, gleaming under the Arizona sun like a metallic jewel, sat a silver Porsche 911. "That's it. That's my dream car. I've wanted one since I was 16. He pulled into the lot before either Sarah or I could object, parking directly in front of the sports car like he was afraid it might disappear. Sarah rolled her eyes at her husband's boyish enthusiasm, but she was smiling. "Marcus, we're not buying a Porsche today. Mom just finished chemo, for heaven's sake." But Marcus was already out of the car, circling the Porsche like a predator studying prey. The salesman appeared as if summoned by the scent of money, his smile wide and practiced. "Beautiful car, isn't she?" the salesman said, extending his hand to Marcus. "Just came in yesterday. 2023 model, only 8,000 miles. Previous owner was a collector who barely drove it." Marcus's eyes lit up as he ran his fingers along the hood. "What's the asking price?" he asked, though I could tell from his expression that price was becoming irrelevant. "78,000, the salesman replied smoothly. "But for the right buyer, we might have some flexibility." Sarah and I exchanged glances. Marcus made good money as an engineer, but 78,000 was more than his annual salary. Still, watching him look at that car was like watching a man fall in love. "We should go," Sarah said gently. "Mom needs to rest." But I was watching Marcus's face, seeing something I'd never seen before. Pure, unfiltered desire. In the 3 years since Sarah's wedding, I'd grown fond of my son-in-law. He'd been around even longer, dating Sarah for 2 years before they married, and had always been supportive. He worked hard, treated my daughter well, and had been incredibly helpful during my cancer treatment. If anyone deserved a dream, it was him. That's when Sarah did something that stopped my heart. Without hesitation, without asking, without even a moment's pause, she reached into my purse, pulled out my credit card, and handed it to Marcus. "Use Mom's card," she said, her voice casual as if she were lending him a pen. "She has over 500,000 saved up, and honestly, she won't live long enough to spend it all anyway." The words hit me like a physical blow, the casual cruelty of it. The assumption that my death was inevitable, the fact that she'd obviously discussed my finances with her husband in detail. I sat frozen in the back seat, watching my daughter negotiate my own money away, while my son-in-law's eyes gleamed with greed I'd never noticed before. Marcus took the card without questioning where the information about my savings had come from. The salesman was already pulling out paperwork, sensing an easy sale. "We can have this processed within the hour," he said, practically salivating. "Just need to run the card and handle the title transfer." I should have spoken up, should have snatched my card back and demanded an explanation. But I was still reeling from the chemical fog of my final treatment, still processing what I'd just heard. Instead, I sat in stunned silence as my daughter and son-in-law spent my money on a car I'd never be allowed to drive, celebrating my survival by planning for my death. The paperwork took 47 minutes. I know because I watched every second tick by on the dealership's wall clock, my mind slowly clearing as the reality of what was happening sank in. By the time Marcus was sliding behind the wheel of his new Porsche, I had made a decision that would change everything. 3 days later, I was sitting in my own silver Porsche 911, watching through the dealership window as my daughter and son-in-law were led away in handcuffs. But that's getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand how a 68-year-old cancer survivor went from victim to victor in less than 72 hours. The ride home from the dealership was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Marcus drove his new Porsche ahead of us, while Sarah followed in our car, chattering excitedly about how handsome her husband looked behind the wheel. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands folded in my lap, saying nothing. The silence must have seemed like fatigue to Sarah because she kept glancing at me with concerned looks. "Are you feeling okay, Mom? Maybe we should have gone straight home instead of stopping." Her voice was gentle, caring, the same tone she'd used throughout my treatment. It was almost worse than the casual cruelty at the dealership. This returned to pretending she cared about my well-being. "I'm fine," I managed, though I was anything but. My mind was racing, replaying her words over and over. She won't live long enough to spend it anyway. The financial discussion they'd obviously had about me. The way Marcus had taken my card without hesitation, as if they'd planned this moment. When we pulled into my driveway, Marcus was already out of the Porsche, running his hands over every surface like a teenager with his first car. "Helen," he called out to me, using the name he'd called me since the wedding. "Come see how smooth this interior is. This leather is like butter." His enthusiasm was infectious, almost innocent, and for a moment I wondered if I was overreacting. But then I saw the way he and Sarah exchanged glances, a look that said they'd gotten away with something. Sarah's shoulders had relaxed in a way that told me she'd been nervous about my reaction. They'd gambled on my gratitude for their support during treatment, my exhaustion from chemo, my natural tendency to avoid confrontation. They'd calculated correctly until now. "You know what?" I said, forcing a smile. "I think I'd like to take a nap. The treatment always makes me tired." Sarah immediately shifted into caregiver mode, helping me up the front steps and fussing over whether I'd eaten enough lunch. "Should I make you some soup? Or maybe that ginger tea Dr. Morrison recommended?" "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired." I let her tuck me into bed like I was a child, accepting her kisses on my forehead and promises to check on me in a few hours. Through my bedroom window, I could hear Marcus starting the Porsche's engine over and over, revving it like a motorcycle. The sound made my teeth ache. Once they left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for exactly 10 minutes. Then I got up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. If Sarah and Marcus wanted to discuss my finances, they were about to learn exactly how much money I really had. And more importantly, how a woman doesn't survive 68 years, raise 2 children, and beat cancer by being naive about people's motives. My first call was to Patricia Williams, my financial advisor at Phoenix National Bank. Patricia had been managing my investments since my husband David died 6 years ago, turning his modest life insurance policy and our savings into something substantial through careful planning and smart choices. She answered on the second ring. "Helen, how did the treatment go today?" Patricia's voice was warm with genuine concern. Unlike my daughter, Patricia knew my survival odds were actually quite good. Stage 2 breast cancer with an excellent prognosis, especially given my overall health and the aggressive treatment protocol. "Treatment went fine, Patricia, but I need to discuss something urgent about my accounts." I explained what had happened at the dealership, watching Patricia's silence stretch longer with each detail. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "Helen, I have to ask, did you authorize this purchase?" Her professional training was kicking in, and I could practically hear her taking notes. "Absolutely not. And I need to know exactly how much they charged to my card. Plus, I want to understand all my options." Patricia put me on hold while she accessed my accounts. When she came back, her voice was grim. The charge was processed for $78,000 plus taxes and fees. "Total damage is $84,247. She paused. "Helen, this is a significant amount. If you didn't authorize it—" "I want to report it as fraud," I said clearly. "And I want to understand exactly what that means for Sarah and Marcus." Patricia walked me through the process. Since the purchase was over $50,000 and made without my authorization, it would automatically trigger a federal investigation. The dealership would be required to cooperate, providing security footage and documentation. If the FBI determined the purchase was fraudulent, Sarah and Marcus could face charges for felony fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The penalties could include significant jail time, Patricia warned. "Are you sure you want to go down this road? It's your daughter we're talking about." That question hung in the air between us. Was I sure? Was I ready to potentially send my only daughter to prison over a car? I thought about her words at the dealership, her casual dismissal of my survival, the way she'd discussed my money with her husband, like I was already dead, the calculation in her eyes when she handed over my card. "Patricia," I said quietly, "they're counting on me being too weak or too grateful to fight back. They're wrong. Then we move forward. I'll start the fraud report immediately and freeze the card to prevent any additional charges." As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Not hope this time, but power. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't the victim of circumstance. My second call was to Detective Ramon Santos at the Phoenix Police Department. Ramon had been David's partner for 12 years before David retired, and he'd kept in touch with our family ever since. When I explained the situation, his response was immediate and sharp. "Helen, this is serious stuff. Even if it's family, fraud is fraud." He paused. "Though I have to warn you, once this investigation starts, you can't just change your mind if things get uncomfortable." I assured him I understood the implications. Ramon promised to coordinate with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit and suggested I document everything: the timeline, conversations, any evidence of premeditation. That evening, Sarah called to check on me. "How are you feeling, Mom? You seemed tired earlier." Her voice was sweet, concerned, completely normal. It was like the afternoon at the dealership had never happened. "I'm feeling much better," I said truthfully. "In fact, I'm feeling stronger than I have in months." We chatted about dinner plans for the weekend, about Marcus's excitement over his new car, about my upcoming follow-up appointment with Dr. Morrison. Normal mother-daughter conversation that felt completely surreal given what I'd set in motion. After we hung up, I sat on my back patio with a cup of tea, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In 48 hours, the investigation would be complete. Security footage would confirm that I never consented to the purchase. Bank records would show the unauthorized use of my card. And my daughter and son-in-law would learn that underestimating a cancer survivor was the biggest mistake of their lives. But I wasn't done yet, because if they thought $78,000 was worth betraying me for, they had no idea what I was actually worth. The next morning, I woke up before dawn feeling more energetic than I had in months. Maybe it was knowing that my treatment was finally over, or maybe it was the clarity that comes from making a difficult but necessary decision. Either way, I had work to do. My first stop was Henderson's Luxury Cars, where I arrived just as they opened at 9. The same salesman who'd processed Marcus's purchase yesterday greeted me with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for customers who don't ask about financing. "Mrs. Winters, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you today?" "I'm interested in looking at sports cars," I said, letting my gaze wander across the showroom. Something with character, something that makes a statement. The salesman, whose nameplate read Jim Morrison, no relation to the singer he'd assured me yesterday, lit up like Christmas morning. "We have several excellent options. What kind of statement are you looking to make?" I smiled, thinking about Sarah and Marcus probably still asleep at home, dreaming about their new toy. The kind that says I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Jim showed me 3 different cars, but I kept coming back to a particular model. A silver Porsche 911, identical to the one Marcus had purchased with my money, except this one was a 2024 with only 300 miles on it. "How much?" I asked, running my fingers along the hood just as Marcus had done yesterday. "This one's $82,000, Jim said, but it's worth every penny, top-of-the-line features, barely driven." I pulled out my checkbook, the same account Sarah and Marcus had violated, and wrote a check for the full amount. Jim's eyes widened as he processed the cash sale. "Mrs. Winters, I have to say, it's unusual to see someone pay cash for a vehicle like this." I handed him the check with a smile. "At my age, you learn not to put off the things that make you happy." An hour later, I was driving my new Porsche home, the desert wind whipping through my hair as I took the long way through Scottsdale. The car handled like a dream, responsive and powerful in a way that made me feel 20 years younger. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Sarah's car was already there. She was sitting on my front porch, her face etched with worry. "Mom? Where were you? I've been calling for an hour." She stood up as I got out of the Porsche, her eyes widening as she took in the car, my wind-blown hair, the unmistakable glow of someone who'd just spent a lot of money. I went shopping, I said simply. I decided if Marcus could have a new car, so could I. Sarah's mouth opened and closed several times, like a fish out of water. Mom, you bought a Porsche? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I did. Do you like it? I asked, patting the hood affectionately. It's exactly like Marcus's, except newer. Sarah looked like she might faint. Mom, how much did this cost? The concern in her voice wasn't maternal anymore. It was financial panic. $82,000, I said cheerfully. But don't worry. According to you, I have plenty of money, and I won't live long enough to spend it anyway. Sarah's face went white. Mom, I didn't mean yesterday. I was just what? Just assuming I was too weak to notice? Too grateful for your help to question your decisions? I unlocked my front door and walked inside, leaving Sarah to follow. We need to talk. In my living room, Sarah perched on the edge of the sofa like she was ready to flee. Mom, about yesterday, I think there was a misunderstanding. I settled into my favorite chair, the one David had bought me for my 60th birthday, and studied my daughter's face. What kind of misunderstanding, sweetheart? Well, when I gave Marcus your card, we've been talking about how grateful we are for everything you've done for us during your treatment. And Marcus has been working so hard, and he's been so worried about you, and when I saw how much he wanted that car— She was babbling now, her carefully constructed justification falling apart under examination. So, you decided to spend my money as a thank you gift to your husband? I kept my voice level, curious rather than accusatory. Without asking me first? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I knew you'd say yes if I asked. You always do. You're so generous, Mom. Sometimes too generous for your own good. That phrase, too generous for your own good, hit me like a revelation. How many times had I heard it over the years? From Sarah when I donated to charity. From Marcus when I helped their friends with moving expenses. From neighbors when I paid for Girl Scout cookies I didn't want. I'd always taken it as a compliment, but now I heard it differently. It was an accusation, a character flaw they'd been discussing behind my back. And the comment about me not living long enough to spend my money? I asked quietly. Sarah's face crumpled. Mom, the doctor said the prognosis was good, but cancer it's unpredictable. Marcus and I have been talking about what would happen if the treatment didn't work. We want to make sure you enjoy life while you can. By spending my money on things I'll never use? Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. By making sure the people we love get to experience happiness. The car makes Marcus so happy, Mom. You should see how he lights up when he talks about it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my new Porsche gleaming in the afternoon sun. And my happiness? My right to make my own financial decisions? How do those factor into your calculations? The silence stretched between us. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice small and defeated. We messed up. I see that now. But Mom, we can fix this. Marcus can return the car, and we can pretend yesterday never happened. I turned back to face her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. My beautiful, capable daughter, who'd somehow learned to see her mother as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Sarah, some things can't be pre-taken back. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. What are you saying? The panic was creeping back into her voice. I walked over and sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in mine. I'm saying that yesterday, when you handed Marcus my credit card, you made a choice. You chose to see me as someone whose money matters more than whose consent matters. And today, I'm making a choice too. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting the moment. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. It's Marcus. Mom, please, whatever you're planning. I squeezed her hands gently. Answer it, sweetheart. But remember, some conversations can't be unheard, just like some actions can't be undone. As Sarah lifted the phone to her ear, I could hear Marcus's voice even from across the room, high-pitched with panic and unmistakably frightened. The investigation was moving faster than I'd expected. In a few hours, they'd both understand exactly how expensive their gratitude had really been. Sarah's face went from pale to ashen as she listened to Marcus on the phone. Even from where I sat, I could hear fragments of his panicked explanation. FBI agents, fraud investigation. They took the car. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. Mom, what did you do? Her voice was barely a whisper. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, needing something to do with my hands. Making tea had always calmed me, and right now I needed all the calm I could get. I reported the unauthorized use of my credit card, I said, filling the kettle with water. It's what any responsible person does when someone steals from them. Sarah followed me into the kitchen, her movements jerky with fear. Steals? Mom, I'm your daughter. We're family. Family doesn't steal, Sarah. I kept my back to her, focusing on the ritual of preparing tea. Earl Grey, 2 sugars, a splash of milk, the same way I'd been making it for 40 years. Family asks permission. Family respects boundaries. Family doesn't assume you're too weak or too dead to make your own choices. I could hear Sarah crying behind me. Soft sobs that once would have made me drop everything to comfort her. Today, they sounded like the tears of someone who'd finally realized the consequences of their actions. Marcus is at the police station, she said. They're questioning him about fraud. Federal fraud, Mom. Do you know what that means? I turned around, leaning against the counter as I studied my daughter's face. It means the government takes stealing seriously, even when family members do it. The kettle whistled, and I poured water over the tea bags, watching the clear liquid slowly turn amber. It means there are consequences for treating people like ATMs. But you gave me access to that account years ago. For emergencies. Sarah's voice was desperate now, grasping for any legal foothold that might save them. I nodded thoughtfully. I did give you emergency access for medical bills, home repairs, genuine crises. Was Marcus wanting a Porsche an emergency? Sarah's silence was answer enough when I'd given her access to my accounts. It was after David's death, when I was overwhelmed with grief and grateful for her help managing my affairs. I'd never imagined she'd use that access to fund her husband's wish list. Mom, please, Sarah said, her voice breaking. You can stop this. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you gave permission after all. I poured the tea into 2 cups, adding sugar and milk to both. Even in the middle of a family crisis, some habits died hard. Drink your tea, I said, handing her a cup. We need to talk about some things you don't know. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup like it was an anchor. What things? I settled across from her at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd had countless conversations over the years. Homework help, boy troubles, college plans, wedding arrangements. Never anything like this. Did you know that when your father died, he left me more than just the life insurance policy? Sarah looked confused. What do you mean? Ooh, the insurance was $100,000, and you had your savings. I smiled, remembering David's quiet pride in his financial planning. Your father was much more careful with money than anyone knew. He had investments, pension benefits, real estate holdings that he never talked about. He was old-fashioned that way, thought money talk was ungentlemanly. Sarah's cup clinked against her saucer as she set it down with unsteady hands. How much more? The question came out in a whisper. Enough that the $84,000 you and Marcus spent yesterday represents about 2% of my total assets, I said calmly. I'm not poor, Sarah. I'm not desperate, and I'm not dying anytime soon. The color drained from Sarah's face completely. 2%? I nodded. Dr. Morrison gave me a 93% 5-year survival rate. My oncologist expects me to live another 20 to 25 years. Plenty of time to spend my money on things I actually want. Sarah stared at me like I was a stranger. But you live so modestly. You drive that old Honda, you shop at discount stores. You never. I learned from your father that living below your means is how you stay comfortable. Just because I have money doesn't mean I need to flaunt it. I sipped my tea, letting that sink in. Unlike some people who think a windfall is permission to buy toys. My phone rang, interrupting the tension. Detective Santos's number flashed on the screen. Excuse me, I said to Sarah, answering the call. Helen, we've got Marcus here for questioning, Ramon said without preamble. The federal agents want to know if you're willing to come in and give a formal statement. Of course, I replied, watching Sarah's face crumble as she realized the investigation was real and moving forward. Should I come now? That would be helpful. And Helen? You should know that your son-in-law is claiming his wife told him you'd given permission for the purchase. The agents will want to ask you about that specifically. After I hung up, Sarah was staring at me with a mixture of fear and something that looked almost like respect. You're really going to testify against us? I finished my tea and stood up. I'm going to tell the truth, Sarah, that I never gave permission for the purchase and that you and Marcus took my card without authorization. The rest is up to the investigators." Sarah started crying again, harder this time. "Mom, please. Marcus could go to prison. I could go to prison. We're talking about our lives here." I paused at the kitchen doorway, looking back at my daughter. At 32, she was still beautiful, still capable of breaking hearts with her tears. But she was also old enough to know better. "You should have thought about that before you decided my money was yours to spend," I said gently. "Actions have consequences, sweetheart. It's a lesson I should have taught you better when you were younger." As I gathered my purse and keys, Sarah followed me to the front door. "What happens now?" she asked. I looked out at my silver Porsche, then at her tear-stained face. "Now you and Marcus learn what it costs to underestimate a cancer survivor who's tired of being everyone's piggy bank." The drive to the police station was surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. Sarah and Marcus had made their choice at that dealership. Now I was making mine. But first, I had one more stop to make. There was still something they didn't know about their perfect crime, and it was going to change everything. The Phoenix Federal Building was more intimidating than I'd expected, all glass and steel reaching toward the desert sky like a monument to justice. Detective Santos met me in the lobby, his familiar face a comfort in the sterile government environment. "Helen, I have to say, you look remarkably calm for someone about to put her own daughter in federal custody," he said as we waited for the elevator. I adjusted my purse strap, feeling the weight of the documents I'd brought. Maybe that's because I know something they don't. The FBI agents, Sarah Richardson and Michael Chen, were professional but intense. Agent Richardson, a woman about Sarah's age with steel-gray eyes, led the questioning while Agent Chen took notes. "Mrs. Winters, can you walk us through exactly what happened at Henderson's luxury cars yesterday?" I recounted the events in detail. The stop at the dealership, Marcus's enthusiasm for the Porsche, Sarah's casual announcement about my finances, and her unauthorized use of my credit card. Agent Richardson's expression remained neutral, but I caught Agent Chen exchanging a look with Detective Santos when I mentioned the $500,000. "Did you at any point give verbal permission for this purchase?" Agent Richardson asked. "No, I was in shock. I'd just finished my final chemotherapy treatment, and my daughter was discussing my death and my money like I wasn't even there." Agent Chen leaned forward. "Mrs. Winters, your daughter claims she had previous authorization to use your accounts for family expenses." I opened my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. She did have emergency access, which is why I brought these. I spread the documents across the conference table, bank statements showing every transaction Sarah had made over the past 3 years, each one carefully highlighted and annotated. Emergency dental work for her husband, $4,200. Emergency vacation to Hawaii, $8,500. Emergency kitchen renovation, $15,000. I looked up at Agent Richardson. Apparently everything in their lives qualifies as an emergency except asking my permission first. Detective Santos whistled low. "Helen, how much are we talking about total?" I'd spent 2 hours this morning with my calculator and banking records. Over the past 3 years, Sarah has withdrawn $127,000 from my accounts. The Porsche purchase was just the largest single transaction. Agent Chen's pen stopped moving. "Mrs. Winters, are you saying this pattern of unauthorized access has been going on for years?" I nodded. "I've been documenting everything, but I kept making excuses. She was helping me after David's death. She was supporting me through cancer treatment. She was family. I convinced myself that family meant sharing everything." Agent Richardson studied the bank statements. "This goes beyond simple fraud. We're looking at a pattern of financial exploitation spanning multiple years." She looked up at me. "Mrs. Winters, I have to ask, are you prepared for the full scope of charges this evidence could support?" That was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating all morning. "Agent Richardson, how much trouble are Sarah and Marcus actually facing?" She consulted her notes. "Based on the single credit card incident alone, we're looking at federal fraud charges that could carry 5 to 10 years. With this pattern of financial exploitation you've documented—" She paused. "We could be talking about significantly more time." I felt the weight of what I'd set in motion settling around me like a heavy blanket. And if I choose not to pursue the additional charges? If I limit this to just the Portia incident, Agent Chen answered, you can't choose which federal crimes to prosecute, Mrs. Winters. Once we have evidence of criminal activity, the decision to proceed belongs to the federal prosecutor, not to you. The room fell quiet, except for the air conditioning humming overhead. I thought about Sarah sitting in my kitchen this morning, crying over tea and asking what would happen next. She'd had no idea that her unauthorized access to my accounts over the years had created a paper trail that could put her in prison for decades. Mrs. Winters, Agent Richardson said gently, there is one factor that could significantly impact the charges and sentencing. I looked up hopefully. What factor? Cooperation and restitution. If your daughter and her husband cooperate fully with the investigation and make complete restitution for all unauthorized transactions, that could influence how the prosecutor handles the case. Complete restitution would be $127,000? Agent Chen nodded. Plus interest, penalties, and court costs. We're probably looking at $150,000 total. That number hung in the air between us. I knew exactly how much money Sarah and Marcus had in their accounts, because Sarah had been complaining about their finances for months. They had maybe $20,000 in savings. If that. They don't have that kind of money, I said quietly. Then they'll need to figure out how to get it, Agent Richardson replied. Liquidate assets, secure loans, sell property. The court won't be sympathetic to defendants who spent money they couldn't afford to repay. As I prepared to leave the federal building, Detective Santos walked me to my car. Helen, I have to ask, are you okay with how serious this has become? I looked back at the building where my daughter and son-in-law were probably being processed for federal crimes. Ramon, for 3 years I've been the family ATM. I've watched them spend my money on luxuries while I shopped at thrift stores and worried about being a burden. Yesterday at that dealership, I realized they weren't just taking my money, they were taking my dignity. And now, I unlocked my Porsche, still strange and wonderful after just 1 day of ownership. Now they're going to learn that every choice has a price, and some lessons are more expensive than others. As I drove home, I thought about the phone call I'd need to make. Sarah and Marcus would be released on their own recognizance within a few hours, and they'd need someone to explain exactly how deep the hole they'd dug really was. They thought they'd been cleverly managing my finances for years. Instead, they'd been documenting their own crimes one transaction at a time. The irony was almost beautiful. In trying to spend my money before I died, they'd created the evidence that might cost them decades of their own lives. But I wasn't done with them yet. There was still one more surprise waiting. One final lesson about what happens when you underestimate a woman who spent 68 years learning how to survive. Sarah and Marcus were waiting on my front porch when I got home from the federal building, both of them looking like they'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. Marcus's face was pale and drawn, his usual confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd just seen his future evaporate. Sarah's tears had dried, leaving her makeup streaked and her expression eerily calm. "Mom," Sarah said as I walked up the front steps, "we need to talk." I unlocked my front door and gestured for them to follow me inside. I imagine you do. In my living room, they sat together on the sofa, holding hands like survivors of a shipwreck. Marcus spoke first, his voice hoarse from hours of interrogation. "Helen, I need you to know that I never intended for this to become what it's become." He cleared his throat. "When Sarah gave me your card yesterday, I honestly thought you'd given permission." I settled into my chair, studying their faces. "And when she told you I had $500,000 and wouldn't live long enough to spend it, what did you think then?" Marcus winced. "I thought she was being dramatic. You know how Sarah gets when she's emotional." Sarah shot him a sharp look. "Don't put this on me, Marcus. You were practically drooling over that car before I said anything about Mom's money. So now you're turning on each other?" I observed. How quickly family loyalty disappears when consequences arrive. They both looked stricken, and I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "The FBI agents explained what you're facing," I continued. "Federal fraud charges, possibly conspiracy, definitely financial exploitation of an elderly person." "Mom?" "Please," Sarah said, her voice breaking again. "We know we messed up, but there has to be something we can do. Some way to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely peaceful despite the chaos surrounding us. There is one way, according to the agents. Complete restitution plus cooperation with their investigation. Marcus sat up straighter. How much restitution? I pulled out the folder of bank statements I'd shown the FBI. $127,000 you've taken over the past 3 years, plus interest and penalties. They estimate about $150,000 total. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We don't have that kind of money. I nodded sympathetically. I know. Your mortgage is $2,400 a month, your car payments are $800, your credit cards are nearly maxed out, and your savings account has about $18,000 in it. Sarah stared at me in shock. How do you know our exact finances? I smiled. Sarah, sweetheart, I've been listening to you complain about money for 3 years. You've told me every detail of your financial struggles, usually right before asking me for help. I opened the folder wider, showing them highlighted sections of their unauthorized withdrawals. Emergency dental work, emergency vacation, emergency furniture, emergency car repairs. Funny how every emergency coincided with something you wanted but couldn't afford. Marcus was reading over the documents, his face growing paler with each page. Jesus, I didn't realize how often we'd stolen from me? I finished gently. The word you're looking for is stolen, Marcus. Sarah was crying again, but quietly this time, like she'd finally run out of dramatic energy. Mom, what are we going to do? We could go to prison for years. Our lives are ruined. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my silver Porsche gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Your lives aren't ruined, Sarah. They're just more complicated now. I turned back to face them. And I'm going to help you, because that's what mothers do. Both of them looked up hopefully. You'll tell the FBI it was all a misunderstanding? Marcus asked. I shook my head. No, Marcus, I'm going to tell them the truth. But I'm also going to help you raise the restitution money. Sarah looked confused. How? We don't have any assets worth that much. I walked over to my desk and pulled out another folder, this one containing documents they'd never seen. Actually, you do. You just don't know it yet. I spread the papers across the coffee table. Property deeds, investment portfolios, bank statements from accounts they didn't know existed. When your father died, Sarah, he left instructions for his estate that I never fully explained to you. Sarah picked up one of the documents, her hands shaking. This is a deed to property in Sedona. I've never heard of this address. I nodded. Your father bought that land 30 years ago as an investment. It's worth about $200,000 now. I pointed to another document. This is his pension fund that's been earning interest for 6 years. This is a trust fund he set up for you when you were born. Marcus was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Helen, what are you saying? I sat back down, feeling the weight of years of secrecy lifting off my shoulders. I'm saying that David was much more financially sophisticated than anyone knew. He didn't just leave me comfortable, he made sure Sarah would be comfortable too, when she was mature enough to handle the responsibility. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. How much? I consulted the most recent statements. Your inheritance, which I've been managing since your father's death, is worth approximately $180,000. The number seemed to echo in the quiet room. Combined with liquidating the Sedona property, you have enough to make full restitution and still have money left over. But why didn't you tell me? Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and anger. Why did you let me struggle? Let us worry about money when there was this whole inheritance waiting. I met her eyes steadily. Because over the years, I began to notice changes in your attitude about money, about what you felt entitled to. Your father made me promise not to give it to you until you learned the value of money, until you learned to respect other people's financial boundaries. After watching how you handled my accounts these past 3 years, I knew he was right to be concerned. Marcus was doing calculations in his head. So we can pay back the money and avoid prison? I nodded. You can make restitution, probably negotiate plea deals that avoid significant jail time, and start your lives over with a better understanding of consequences. Sarah was staring at the inheritance documents like they might disappear. But Mom, if I have this money, why did we spend years taking from your accounts? That was the question I'd been waiting for. Because it was easier to take from me than to wait for what was rightfully yours. Because you assumed I was too old, too sick, or too grateful to notice or care. I gathered up the papers, holding Sarah's financial future in my hands. Your inheritance comes with conditions now. Conditions your father never anticipated, but that have become necessary. Sarah and Marcus both looked at me with growing apprehension. What conditions? First, complete restitution to my accounts within 30 days. Second, formal letters of apology acknowledging that you stole from me, not borrowed. Third, you'll attend financial counseling to learn how to manage money responsibly. I paused, letting that sink in. And fourth, you'll never have access to my personal accounts again, ever. Marcus nodded quickly. Those seem reasonable. Helen, we're grateful for this chance to make things right. But Sarah was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not gratitude, but something closer to calculation. And if we refuse these conditions? If we decide to take our chances with the federal charges? I smiled, recognizing my daughter's rebellious streak finally emerging in full force. Then you go to prison, and your inheritance goes to the Phoenix Children's Hospital in your name. Either way, you won't be spending my money anymore. The room fell quiet as Sarah and Marcus absorbed the reality of their situation. They could accept help with strings attached, or they could face federal charges with their pride intact. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was more than they'd given me at that dealership. We accept, Marcus said finally. We accept all the conditions. Sarah nodded reluctantly. We'll do whatever it takes. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Good. Then we'll start the restitution process tomorrow. Tonight, I'm taking my new Porsche out for dinner to celebrate my recovery. As I gathered my purse and keys, Sarah called out, Mom, are we going to be okay? Our relationship, I mean? I paused at the front door, looking back at my daughter and son-in-law. They looked young and scared and genuinely sorry for the first time since this all began. Sarah, for the first time in 3 years, we have a chance to build a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. Whether we're okay depends on whether you can learn to see me as your mother instead of your bank account. As I drove away in my Porsche, windows down and music up, I thought about the strange journey from victim to victor. It had started with a casual betrayal at a car dealership and ended with a family that might finally understand the difference between love and exploitation. Sarah and Marcus had learned that stealing from family wasn't consequence-free, and I'd learned that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who respect you least. But most importantly, I'd learned that cancer might have tried to kill me, but I was far too stubborn to die before I'd finished teaching the people I loved how to treat me properly. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as I drove toward my favorite restaurant. A cancer survivor in a silver Porsche, finally free to spend my own money on my own happiness. And if that wasn't worth celebrating, nothing was. 3 months later, Sarah and Marcus had completed their restitution, attended financial counseling, and rebuilt their relationship with money and with me. The federal charges were reduced to misdemeanors with community service, and they were slowly earning back my trust through actions rather than words. But that's another story entirely. This one ends with a simple truth. Never underestimate a woman who survived cancer, raised children, and finally learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just exploitation with prettier packaging. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's victim ever again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.